So the OA Preamble. Overeaters Anonymous is a fellowship of individuals who, through shared experience, strength and hope, are recovering from compulsive overeating. We welcome everyone who wants to stop eating compulsively. There are no dues or fees for members. We are self-supporting through our own contributions, neither soliciting nor accepting outside donations. OA is not affiliated with any public or private organisation, political movement, ideology or religious doctrine. We take no position on outside issues. Our primary purpose is to abstain from compulsive eating and compulsive food behaviours, and to carry the message of recovery through the 12 steps of OA to those who still suffer. So how our meeting works. At this meeting, we follow a rotating format. On the second week of the month is a speaker who has recovered from compulsive eating, who will be sharing on a topic of their choosing. This will be followed by a question and answer session for the remainder of the meeting. And all fellows are welcome to ask questions of the speaker. So at this meeting, it will be recorded by audio only, as you'll see at the top of your screens. And at this meeting, the Q&A segment will also be recorded. And if you have any questions, we ask you at the appropriate time, direct them to our host carer, who will ask them on your behalf. But please do not do this before the section opens. So just a reminder of our 7th tradition. Although we meet electronically, we do have Zoom meeting costs to pay, and we also send contributions to our virtual intergroup. To make a contribution, you can do so via the PayPal link, which will be entered into the chat. And if there's any newcomers, we ask that you wait until you're sure you want to be here. So today, thankfully, is a speaker meeting, and we are honoured to welcome Gary with us, who will be sharing on the topic of steps, my journey to recovery. So Gary, it's over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm a recovered compulsive eater and a member of the Saturday Solutions Group. My name is Gary, and I hope I have something to say. I should say this first. Charlotte invited me to speak here today, so if I suck, you know who to blame. That's on her. So I'll start at the beginning. I came into OA. I've been in OA 34 and a half years. I've been an active member of OA all that time. I've never left the fellowship. I wish I could tell you I've been abstinent all that time. I haven't been. I haven't eaten sugar or I haven't eaten any of the things I do not eat in 34 and a half years. And I haven't eaten, any of the stuff I don't eat. You know, sugar and crap, dessert, that type of stuff. But I've overeaten. It's happened, I think, like 3 times where I've just lost track of, I stopped weighing and measuring, I stopped paying attention, then it's an extra slice of this, an extra slice of that. And before you know it, I really couldn't tell where my abstinence was ending and my eating was beginning. It was just kind of blurred. I feel like I literally lost my abstinence, like I misplaced it, like just, and it's happened a couple of times. And there was a period of time where I was gaining weight in a way and believing I was abstinent because I wasn't eating sugar. I wasn't eating any of what they today call my alcoholic foods. Turns out that for me, food is an alcoholic food. Like I'm also a volume addict, so food will do it. I've never binged on broccoli, but if I overeat broccoli today, tomorrow I'm going to want to overeat sweet potatoes, and if I overeat sweet potatoes the next day, sooner or later I'm going to get around to my drug of choice. Anyhow, I was gaining weight, and I said to my friend Teresita, I said, "Oh, I hope it's okay I mentioned food. I should have asked. I mentioned specific foods. Well, too late now." So I said to my friend Teresita, "I don't know what's going on here. I'm gaining weight even though I'm abstinent." And she said, "Well, if you're gaining weight, what are you abstaining from? It's clearly not overeating, you know." But it turns out that if you're gaining weight, the only way to do that is to overeat. You just, my first response was to want to slap her, of course. But then I listened to it, and it was right on the money. I was gaining weight because I was overeating. And if this was Sugars Anonymous, I'd be a superstar. But it's Overeaters Anonymous, so overeating counts. You know, I have a good friend who says every bite counts. So what happened for me was I came into program August 1st, 1988. I came in through a treatment center. I weighed 340 pounds. And I came in the same day as this anorexic woman came in. We were both the same height. We were both 5'9". I'm now 5'7", which pisses me off terribly. You can't, this is one of my favorite oxymorons, but I have grown shorter. So I've lost 2 inches. Anyhow, that's not how I wanted to lose weight. Anyhow, I was 5'9", she was 5'9". I weighed 340 pounds, she weighed 96 pounds. So we looked like the number 10 walking in the door. Like she was this little straight line and I was as round as I was tall. What happened was I decided to commit suicide. And I had made some half-assed attempts in the past, and this was, I really had a plan. I was going to commit suicide. And what happened, my career was in academics. I was in academics, and in academics, at least in the States, the year kind of starts in August. So like August is like New Year's for me. So I decided that if nothing changed by August, I would commit suicide. And I had a plan, it was all worked out. And then somehow, the only thing I can count for it is the grace of God. Somehow on August 1st of 1988, I ended up in a treatment center for eating disorders. I don't know how that, I have no memory of it today. I think my sister might have mentioned it, but I really don't know. But somehow I ended up in this treatment center. And the way that happened, the way I was going to commit suicide was about 5 years before that, I had gone on a diet, like a doctor diet, and lost 115 pounds. So I flew to New York to show my father, because in my family, when you're thin for 6 or 7 minutes, you fly around to all the family to show them that you're a good boy, you know, that you're thin, so they could see. So I flew to New York to show my father, and he saw that I was a good boy and that I was thin, and he was very proud. And I was staying at the Taft Hotel on 52nd Street, and on my way back to the hotel, I stopped at a deli to pick up food. And from the 115 pounds I lost, I gained back 130 seemingly overnight. It just seemed like I lost 115, and it just seems like within a couple of days, I don't know how that happened, but I gained back 130 pounds, and I'm, pounding the bar again. How did this happen? How did this happen? How, I gained back 130. And from then on, I stopped even trying to diet. I stopped trying to control my food, and I completely surrendered. Like Bill had said in his story, alcohol was my master. And I knew then that food was my master, and I knew what was to become my first step. I didn't know the words for the first step, but I knew I was powerless over food. I knew that it had me, that this thing owned me, and that driven by compulsion, I would do anything. So I got to OA, and then I heard the first step. We are powerless over food. Our lives are unmanageable, and my life was clearly unmanageable. I couldn't stop eating. My bills were paid, and I was always proud of the fact that my bills were paid. But here's the thing: I was still married to my first wife, and my paycheck went right to my first wife, and she paid the bills. So it wasn't like any accomplishment on my part that the bills were paid, that I was still functional. And again, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in the United States, you're considered a functional addict if you can show up for work. I couldn't always show up for work, but I could show up for work often enough to pass as a functional addict, which is ridiculous. Functional addict means somebody who has no relationships, who is miserable, unhappy, suicidal, but I'm showing up for work. Like, that's functional. It tells you more about our culture than it does about addicts. And so I looked at my history to look if I was powerless over food, and my sponsor had me write out my history. And I'll tell you my favorite first step story. It's kind of long, but it's my favorite first step story. I was living in the Caribbean because I was hiding from the police. I was hiding from the New York State authorities. They were going to send me to reform school. And my father was living in the Caribbean because he was hiding from federal authorities. He was going to go to federal prison. So we were down there hiding. And my father, I don't know that he was a compulsive eater, but he certainly had all the symptoms. And at one point, he decided to deal with his compulsive eating by getting rid of all the food in the house. So there was no food in the house, and I was alone in the house. And I was having a craving for carbs. I was having a serious craving for carbs. And any of you who've ever had a craving know what this is. This isn't like something I can reason with or do something about. So I had this craving for carbs. And then I had a thought, and it's always dangerous to have a thought. to this day, like I don't romance any of my food thoughts. When something goes through my head, I deal with it immediately in my head because I know if a food thought lingers in there long enough, I'll lose. I'll lose to the thought, to the insane thought will win out, as it says in the big book. I don't know if you can see me well enough. For those of you who are listening to this on the podcast, certainly can't. But I have the same haircut as Alan. We're both pretty clean, and but even if I sit in a barbershop long enough, I'm going to get a haircut. And the same thing is true if I sit with a thought long enough, I'm going to eat. So I had this thought, and the thought was we had no carbs in the house, but we did have a German Shepherd, and the German Shepherd had dog biscuits. They were called milk bones, and the milk bones were carbs. And I had that thought, and immediately I thought, oh man, you can't. That's disgusting. You can't eat a dog biscuit. So I ate a dog biscuit. No, I had one, and I was right. It was disgusting. I thought it was terrible. I couldn't stand it. And the second one wasn't any better, nor the third, nor the fourth, nor the fifth. They didn't get better no matter how many I ate. They stayed disgusting. And I remember the first time I told that story was at a beginner's meeting, and there was this group of what I then thought of as elderly ladies. They were probably younger than I am now. But these women were in the front row, and I told that story, and I said that by eating dog biscuits, and they went like this. They went like that, like they were shocked. And I was like, damn. If you can make people in OA go like that, because you guys have all eaten out of garbage cans and stuff. Like, if I can make you go, it must be, So I didn't know. On my way out of the meeting, I was talking to my friend Maxine, and I asked her, I said, is that really disgusting, you dog biscuit things? Because it's not in my top 10. And she said it's only disgusting if you had to wrestle them away from the dog. And she was right on the money. Because here's the thing, especially if you're a newcomer, this isn't about dog biscuits. And if this sounds extreme to you, or if this is a little bit intense and your story isn't like this, here's what the point. And this is why it's a first step story. Nobody eats dog biscuits out of choice. If I had any choice in the world, I would not have eaten dog biscuits. I sponsored a guy who ate 700 pounds. Nobody gets to 700 pounds. I don't know what that is in kilos. I'm sorry. Americans, we don't know crap. You know how we are. We think we're the center of the universe and don't have to learn anything. Anyhow, whatever 700 pounds. I sponsored a guy who weighed 700 pounds. Nobody gets that size by choice. Nobody eats dog biscuits by choice. That's what it means to be powerless over food. That's what it means to have a first step. And I knew then, and this is what it means to me to have my life be unmanageable, that driven by compulsion, there's nothing I wouldn't do. That's what compulsion means. Compulsion means that there's a line in Dante's Inferno where he says, after such knowledge, what forgiveness? Once I know this about myself, I can't unknow it. I know that not just with food, but I'm a compulsive person. I'm a compulsive eater, which means everything, whether or not to be in a relationship, whether or not to date, whether or not to go to school, whether or not to get an education, anything I did was driven by compulsion. I never made any real clear choices or disciplined, sitting down in a disciplined manner and figuring out what's right or wrong for me. I just led where I was compulsed to go. And I know that by compulsion, I would do literally anything. So that was my first step. That was like my recognition that I'm powerless over food and my life is unmanageable. I had a sponsor. My sponsor was the first speaker I heard at OA. He had 10 months at the time, and I didn't believe that you could have what I have and have 10 months. His name was Jeff, and he was wonderful. He was my first sponsor for like 8 years. He was my sponsor for like 8 years. And God bless him, he saved my life. And we got to the second step, which came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I had no problem with the sanity part. I knew I was insane. I had no problem about that. And if you're new and if you're wondering, if you have a compulsive, if you have an eating disorder, it means that you have a severe mental illness. And I'm sorry if this is news to you, and I don't mean to but that's what it means. It's in the book. It's in the DSM-5. An eating disorder is a severe mental illness. And we need to be restored to sanity. It's the only way. That's what the step says. And it says we're insane. I had no problem with the insanity part. The God thing, here's where I was. I wasn't really an atheist. I wasn't a believer. I wasn't an agnostic. I was just obnoxious. I was extremely obnoxious. And I was going to argue whatever side, like if you believed in God, I was going to argue why there's no God. If you didn't believe in God, I was going to argue with that. I was just an argument looking to happen. And my sponsor believed in God. So I was arguing with him about why there could be no God. That's what obnoxious people do. So I was arguing with my sponsor about why there's no God. And all the stuff that your sponsee said to you, the Holocaust, people are born blind, like whatever, all the nonsense people say. And my sponsor gave me a direction. It was one of the best directions I've ever been given by a sponsor. So I always like to pass this on, especially to newcomers. What he said to me was, he said, I don't give a hoot what you believe. He didn't use the word hoot, of course. We're guys. He used the word hoot, but you get the gist of it. He said, I don't give a hoot what you believe. He said, you're an active addict. So God hasn't chosen to reveal the nature of the cosmos to you, Moses. He said, it's just like that. Like, who do you think you are that you would know? And it really is the arrogance of the compulsive eater. You would never go over to an active heroin addict with the needle hanging out of his arm and say, tell me, Mr. Heroin Addict, what is the nature of cosmos? Is there a God? Is there an afterlife? Tell me your theology. Like they're an addict. Like everything they believe is designed to support their addiction. And the same thing is true with a compulsive eater. All my beliefs, political, spiritual, all my beliefs were designed to encourage me to continue eating. Anyhow, I said, I don't care what you believe. He said, if you want to get well, it is your job to come to believe this. Find a way. And that's what I did. I found a way to come to believe this. I actually made a decision to believe. Even before I made a decision to trust God in the third step, I made a decision to believe because everybody I saw, I know, but by the way, I know atheists, agnostics in the program who have recovered. Just so you know, I know some. I don't know how they did it. I don't really understand it. I can't wrap my head around it, but I know they have done it. And then I believe them when they tell me they recovered. I couldn't. Everyone I saw who had what I wanted had this God thing going on. So I decided to come to, I have believed much more ridiculous things. I believed when I was young that Judy Levine was madly in love with me. She didn't even know who I was. I believe she was in love with me. I have believed some really ridiculous things in my time. So if what have I got to lose? The worst that could happen is I'm wrong. I decided to believe in God. My sponsor told me, he said, look for evidence. He said, just keep your antenna up. That's the metaphor he used. He said, keep your antenna up. He said, like when you're at a party and there's a real estate agent at the party and somebody at the other side of the room, the real estate agents on one side, the people on the other side, and somebody on the other side of the room says something like, I'm thinking about moving. And boom, the real estate agent is there. Like the real estate agent, like, here's that, goes over, it says, here's my card. If you're thinking of looking for a place, because their antenna are up, looking for and listening for somebody who's going to be moved or a potential client. And that's exactly what I was told to do, was to keep my antenna up and look for evidence of God. And I found it. I found it all over the place. The more I looked for it, the more I found. And I still look all the time for evidence of God's presence in my life. And remarkably, I always find it. Boy, I'm spending a lot of time without even really getting through the steps. I'm going to start moving a little faster. So I came to believe in a power greater than myself to restore me sanity. And the way that works, if you're a newcomer, it's kind of like you have a headache and you take a couple of aspirin and your headache goes away. And you can't really say at what moment it went away. You can't say like at 2:52, my headache went away, but all of a sudden you notice your headache is gone. And it's like that. All of a sudden I noticed I believe in God. And it wasn't like, I could tell you on Tuesday the 14th, I became, holy, but I did. And then it came time to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. And I got on my knees at my sponsor, my first third step. And I get a little choked up the first time whenever I talk about my first third step, because the big book says that sometimes a great effect was felt at once. And I was one of those people where first third step really changed, really altered me. I was on my knees and I was talking to a God I wasn't sure existed. And I said, I don't know where these words came from because it's not part of my lexicon, but I said, God, if it be your will, redeem me, make me new. I asked for redemption. And redemption, like I said, wasn't part of my upbringing. It wasn't part of my, I wasn't raised with religion. but I asked for redemption. I asked to be remade. And here's what happened. God redeemed me. And I know that sounds kind of magical. It's not. The third step in the OA 12 and 12, the third step in the OA 12 and 12 says if one sincerely takes the third step, we cannot help but recover. And that is true. That is my experience. If we sincerely take the third step, we cannot help recover. And it's miraculous, but it's not magical. Because the book goes on to say the reason for that is if we take the third step, that means if we sincerely take the third step, it means we're going to work the rest of the steps. We're going to work and live the rest of the steps, which means we will recover. That's a promise. The preface to the AA 12 and 12 says the 12 steps are a group of principles spiritual in nature, which if practiced as a way of life, not if done once and then bragged about for 30 years, but if we practice them as a way of life, it will remove the obsession and enable the sufferer to live happily and usefully whole. And that's what happened to me. I went on and worked the rest of the steps and I became happily and usefully whole. I talk a lot about the recovery part because if you're a newcomer, you should know this is what happens when we do this stuff. But you should know it's a 12-step fellowship. You'll meet lots of people here who come in who really love the fellowship, who really love being part of the program, but don't work the steps, which is kind of like joining a bowling league, but not bowling. It's like, this is what we do here. It's a 12-step fellowship. But if you do the 12 steps, this is what you get. And I got to the fourth step. And like a lot of people, the fourth step I found a little bit daunting. My first fourth step went on forever. I was so afraid I was going to leave something out. I had, of course, I had my parents who abused me terribly. I could have died at the hands of either of my parents. I was sexually abused, physically abused. I had all that. But I also had spelling, and I also had people who parked the cars in 2 spaces. I had every little thing, and if you ever want to see my fourth step, it's available on boredtodeath.com. It goes on forever. My fifth step took us 3 days. It took us 3 days to do my first fifth step. My poor sponsor, my poor Jeff, poor guy, listening to all that crap. But the fourth step, for any of you who find it daunting, what a gift, what a blessing it is to have the fourth step. Bill Wilson says that we're led to this by necessity, not by virtue. It is not that we're good people that makes us do these things. It's that if we don't do these, we will die. But the fourth step, I am convinced, I don't know this, but I'm pretty certain that most people come to the end of their lives without ever knowing who they were. Most people in those last, and I've been with people when they were dying, in those last 30 seconds go, wait, I never got to be me. I never even got to know. At the end of Death of a Salesman, they're at the funeral, and I hope that's not a spoiler alert for anybody. At the end of Death of a Salesman, there's a funeral. And they're at the funeral, and his son looks down at the grave and says, here's the great tragedy. He never got to know who he is. He never got to know who he is. And we do. We get to know who we are. Between the 4 steps and the 10 steps, we're led to know ourselves. And we're led to that by necessity. But what a blessing to have some sense of who I am, what my assets are, and what my liabilities are, and what I can do to improve and become a better person. And then in the 5th step, to share that with somebody and to develop intimacy. The intimacy I had, especially in my first 5th step with Jeff, was unlike any intimacy I'd ever known before. And it wasn't like talking to a therapist. It wasn't like talking to a rabbi or a priest, because he was somebody who was just another guy, just another compulsive eater, just a run-of-the-mill folk. And man, I left there at my 5th step. It talks in the big book about feeling like we're walking hand in hand with my maker. I don't know if I felt that, but I did feel like a human being. I felt like I belonged to the human race. And having been morbidly obese most of my life, I did not feel that way before. And after my 5th step, I did. I felt like Jeff and I were connected. And through that, I was connected to humanity, and I was like a regular person. And 6 and 7 changed me as much as anything. 6 and 7, the idea of working for character, working to build character for the sake of character, not to win something or get something or achieve something, was unlike anything I'd ever done before. To really seek, as it says in our literature, seek to walk humbly in the presence of God. That's what 6 and 7 is about. It's about true, what Bill Wilson calls true ambition, the decision to walk humbly in the presence of God, and to seek to become a better person, and to do that simply because I can. What a blessing that is. And not just to seek it, because lots of us have a moral code that has us seeking to become better before we get here. But the advantage of the steps is it gives me a lesson and teaches me how to go about that. You know, how to become a better human being, how to develop humility, how to develop character through the practice of those steps. And the 8th step is making this list, you know, like made a list of people who had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Talk about changing, life changing. I was getting ready to make amends to my father and both my parents, really. And like I said, I could have died at the hands of either of my parents. They were horribly abusive. And I was talking to my sponsor and I said, listen, I have stolen some money from my mother's purse, from my father's wallet. I did a few things, but you know, my parents did this. You go to jail for what they did. And I did this. Like what they did seemed so big, and what I did seemed so small. Kind of got a minute. My sponsor said something I'll never forget. He said, why don't you just forgive him like that? He said, why don't you just forgive him? And I heard that like, why don't you just levitate? You know, like, why don't you just forgive him? But then he said something, he said, forgiveness is simply surrendering your right to revenge. And I had no idea how much of my life I was spending seeking revenge on my parents for them doing it. One of the reasons I stayed obese was so the world would know they did a shitty job. I wouldn't want the world, I'm sorry, the world to know they did a poor job. I wouldn't want the world to think they were okay. So much of my life was spent on that. And 30 seconds, I'm just going to say 9, 10, 11, 12. What a way of life this is. What a joyful, remarkable way of life. I clean up my mess as I go along. I'm pretty certain that when I die, I won't be leaving a mess behind me, because the 10th step tells me between the 9th and the 10th step, I've cleaned up my mess. Most people don't get to do that. Spending time every day with God, with my maker, and then seeking to live this way of life on a daily basis and to carry this message to the compulsive eaters. I've done and continue to do a lot of service. It is a remarkable way of life. I've used up my time. I don't know how to stop this thing. Stop making noise. That does it. It's a great way of life. God, this program, and you people have not just saved my life, but you have given me a life worth living. If there's ever anything I could do to repay the favor, please let me know. And if I can be of service, my phone number is in my little Hollywood Square box there. Feel free to use it. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Gary. You could have easily gone on for a little bit longer. It was brilliant. It's a whistle-stop tour through the steps. Thank you so much. Okay, so get those questions ready. It's now time for our Q&A session. If you do have a question, obviously Gary's here for the next 25 minutes. Let's make the most of it. Some really hard ones. I'm sure he'll be fine. He'll cope with the questions. Post them to Kara in the chat and she will ask them on your behalf. So I'll hand the rest of the meeting over to Kara.
Thank you, Alan, and everybody get those questions going out. And I'm going to just start with real quickly. Gary, could you give us a day in the life of Gary D? What does that look like program-wise and step 11-wise?
Well, I've been really blessed in my recovery that I'm just like a really happy guy. I mean, so I mean, I do all the things it says in the book, but the most important thing I do is I'm happy. I believe that's a very important part of recovery. I mean, like a lot of people, like most people, you know, I've been through divorce, I've had death in the family, I've had grief, I've had sad occurrences, but I address those things the way a happy person does, not the way an angry person was, which is what I was when I got here. So, you know, I get up in the morning, the first thing I do when I open my eyes is say, thank you, God. And then I get out of bed and I look out the window and I have a beautiful view. I have 2 homes, and both my homes have beautiful views. And I do the upon awakening, ask God to direct my thinking, that I be divorced from self-pity, self-seeking motives, and dishonesty and selfishness and fear. And I ask to focus on the positive and to live in his light. And then I go on with my morning, have some coffee, do my emails, that kind of stuff. And then I spend about half hour, 45 minutes altogether, what I call my God hour. I do my readings and I write to God a little bit, and sit quietly I do 21 minutes because this is the kind of addict I am. I'm told to do 20 minutes, so I do 21 just to make sure I get the 20. That's just addict crap. Like that's just pure addict crap. Like I'm even controlling my meditation and my God time. And then I do my readings and stuff like that. And then I get on my knees and do my prayers and I go on with my day. And throughout the day, I have my alarm set a few times during the day, because in the 10th step, it says throughout the day, we say, thy will not mine be done. So I have my alarm set a few times a day to remind me to say that. And I also pray every time I start my car and every time I eat. I look for little reminders, like I talked about earlier about looking for evidence. I look for reminders to remember that yeah, I have a tattoo with one of the names of God in my hand facing me, so that I'm reminded about my Holy Father throughout the day. Because I need reminders. I get caught up in what Bill Wilson calls worldly clamors, and forget. So I need reminders, and I do that throughout the day. And at night, I don't always, but regularly I try and do a 10-step a night. And when I have resentments or fears, I do 10-step calls. And sounds like I spend a lot of time doing program, but I don't. I go to the gym a lot. I do a lot of service. I'm on a lot of committees. I'm involved in world service, but I've been involved in service since within 6 months. I was at Intergroup. I've been doing service my whole. I recommend it highly. You make friends. You have great experiences. And do I have time to tell a service story?
Mhm. Yes, you do.
I'll do this. So my first service thing was I was in Intergroup, and I came in before we had any literature, and then the Brown book came out, the first edition of the Brown book, the storybook. And my Intergroup decided to put that book in every library in Dade and Monroe counties. And that was a much tougher job than you would think, because when you're trying to get a book with the word God in it into a public library or a school library, it takes some doing. And there were 5 of us on this committee. And if nobody's ever told you this, service is frequently a pain in the ass. There's a reason it's called service and not play. Service. Bill Wilson in the 12 step talks about self-sacrificing action. So a lot of service really is self-sacrificing. It's not like you wake up in the morning saying, gee, I really feel like doing this. It's kind of like you have a friend who needs to be picked up at the airport. You're willing to. You don't wake up in the morning saying, gee, I feel like picking somebody up at the airport. Anyhow, so we're putting this book in all these libraries. And by the end, originally there were 5 of us. By the end, there were only 3 of us, and we hated each other. We were just like, you said you would be there, you weren't there. We were just like taking each other's inventory. We're all newcomers, and we're taking each other's inventory. We're all pissed off. So that's what it was like to get the book. And we eventually got the book in most, if not all, libraries. And so I had all these resentments. 5 years later, exactly 5 years later, I was at a meeting in Hollandale, and this young woman stands up and says she was puking 10 times a day and couldn't stop throwing up. And then she went to a school library and found this Brown book with the stories about people recovering from eating disorders. And that's what brought her to OA. And that changed everything for me, man. That was like, I still get chills when I goosebumps when I tell that story. What a thing, man. What a thing to know I've helped save somebody's life. And to tell you how much the steps affected me by that time, I did not even want to stand up and yell. That was me who did that. That was me. I just sat there quietly crying that I was that involved in somebody's life without even knowing it. Greatly recommend service. I'm sorry again for taking up time with the kind of carrying on. There should be questions.
Thank you so much, Gary. No, that was fantastic. All right, next question is, can you share more about how your relationship with your parents changed?
I changed. Listen, my parents were horribly abusive, but and when I forgave them, I made amends to both of them. My mother and I, surprisingly, my mother was the more violent of the two when I was young. But my mother and I became very close. We became like best friends, and she's passed now. They're both passed. God bless their, God rest their souls. And my mother and I became very close. Now, I did not come to OA to heal my family, but that's what happened. A friend of mine says, the 12 steps don't just change our future, they change our past. They changed the way I looked at my childhood, the way that, I was able to view my parents with much greater compassion. It didn't take away the pain, My sponsor says this all the time. He says, a blind man steps on your toe and you look up and you realize that he's blind and you don't get mad, but it doesn't take away the pain. Your toe still hurts. The fact that he's blind doesn't take that away. And, my parents were blind, and there's a part of me that feels so sad that they never got to, like, I'm a parent. I'm about to become a grandparent. Next month, I'll be a grandparent for the first time. I'm thrilled. And but my parents never got, my father particularly, never got to be the kind of parent I got to be. And that saddens me. So that changed. My mother and I got very close. So my father and I had the best relationship available to us. He wasn't really available for the kind of relationship my mother and I had, but we got to love each other, and I do love them both. But I think what changed mostly is the way I viewed them. And when the way I viewed them, it's like that story in the big book with the glasses, my magnifying glasses. When I viewed them differently, our relationship shifted. And but that idea of forgiveness simply being surrendering my right to revenge has helped me a lot. If somebody's not safe, like my father never became safe for me to be around for long periods of time. If you're a thief and you steal from me, I might forgive you, but that doesn't mean I'm going to invite you back into my house. I'm spiritual, I'm not stupid. There's a difference. So it's kind of like that. Like forgiving you doesn't mean that I ignore who you are or what you've done. It means that I don't have juice on it. I don't condemn you for it. Rather, I have compassion for it. I hope that answers the question. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Gary. Yes. And let's see, we have one sense. You said you were abstinent when it came to sugar, but still gained weight due to overeating. How did you stop overeating at that time?
Oh, I worked a 12-step program. Don't tell anybody, it's a secret, but that's how we stop overeating. Harlan says, I don't know about this, but Harlan says the only way to put down the food is to put down the food. What I've discovered in my experience is if I'm willing to do, willingness grows. So if I start with the things I can do, if I start, like I was told to make 3 phone calls a day and that machines don't count, and not texting, but calling somebody 3 times a day, getting to several meetings a week, doing service. Like if you do the things you can do and are willing to do, willingness grows. And sooner or later, I was willing to eat a little bit less. And sooner or later, the willingness to weigh and measure my food came back. And sooner or later, then the desire to be clean. And then with working the steps, the release of the desire to overeat. I never have cravings for the food I don't eat. I haven't had cravings for the food I don't eat in decades. For those of you who are new, just hope you hear that part. And this is available to all of us. I haven't had cravings for the foods I don't eat in decades. And I am still the same compulsive eater I was when I got here. And I'm a compulsive eater who does not compulsively eat. So what I did was I kept coming to meetings and kept talking about it. I got honest about it. I spoke to my sponsor about it. And I stopped pretending I wasn't in relapse. That was the other thing. I had like 10 years at the time, and it's so hard when you have a lot of years behind you to just to give, in OA, you become an old timer awfully quick. In OA, you lose 100 pounds and you're absent for 5 years. All of a sudden, you're like an old timer. Whereas in other fellowships, 5 years, you're just getting started. It says they say it takes 5 years just to get your brains out of hock. Somewhere in your 5th year, you hear this popping sound, and it's your head coming out of your ass. Whereas here, you're an old timer in 5 years. Anyhow, so part of it is giving up that ego about like, oh, I've got 10 years clean. But I guess once I got honest, the willingness came. And after I had the willingness, the ability came. So if you're struggling with that, I would tell you this: never give up the fight to give up the fight. Keep praying and keep coming, and things get better. They do. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you so much, Gary. We have lots of questions here.
Oh.
How about this? I sometimes struggle to feel God. Do you find this, and how do you keep your connection clear?
Oh man, isn't that heartbreaking? It's the most heartbreaking thing those days when we wake up and we don't feel the presence of God. And at first, when it happens, you kind of feel like, or at least I kind of felt like, oh man, I think I lost it forever. But like most stuff, the first time somebody broke your heart, we didn't think we would survive that. And then by the fourth or fifth time, we kind of got used to it. I don't know. I wish I had an answer to those days and those dry periods, man. I'm not religious, but I'm very much involved. I became a Christian, and I became very much involved with it. Even the prophets, even the holiest people in all religions that I know of, went through periods like that. I wouldn't preach to you about him, but the night before he got arrested, Jesus Christ, who I'm not trying to say he was Christ or godly or any of that stuff, but he was a kind of holy guy. You got to give him that. Even he said, take this cup away from me. I don't want, like, even he said, are you there, God? Mother Teresa has a book about her doubt. She has a book about how she didn't feel God in her life for years. What I'm trying to say is the holiest people on the planet have struggled with that crap. Certainly I'm gonna, like the holiest people, Dalai Lama struggled with that stuff. Like I'm gonna. My experience is, even though it feels like it's gone and I've lost it, if I wait it out, it comes back. I just went through that period last week, and just this morning I was praying in gratitude that the presence of God has returned to me. So I wish I had some answer to that other than wait it out. All I can do is when that happens is wait it out. That's all I can do. But if you come up with a better solution, pass it on, brother. So I can use it.
Thank you, Gary. Our next question. What advice would you give to someone who's been in for years, but recently going through slips and relapses, then getting recovery back on and off? Behavior, please. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a real common experience, man. It's the real hell of 3 days on, 3 days off. It's really like, if you go to enough meetings, you hear that all the time, that people struggle with that. My answer for everything is the 12 steps. I mean, I would ask you what step you're on, and if you think you're on, if you're going through that and you think you're on step 4, you're really on step 3. If you're going through that and you think you're on step 7, you're really on step 6. We need to find new ways of working and incorporating the steps in our lives. If that means, I've had, my current sponsor has been my sponsor for over 20 years. But during those 20 years, I've had additional sponsors, and I've worked the steps with other people as well. So I've never let go of my sponsor. He's my life sponsor. But I've worked the steps with other people, and that's the only solution I know. And if you're struggling with food, I was taught that if I'm struggling, it means I'm not surrendering. That's what struggle means. That I'm still not surrendering, and that I need to work the first step with somebody, and I need to get better at it. I think the first step in OA is a lot harder than the first step in AA or in some other fellowships. I think when the big book says that alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful, alcoholics don't have a clue as to what cunning, powerful, and baffling and powerful look like compared to food. Food tells us lies that are so easy to believe. I could do this once, it's no big thing, I'll give it back tomorrow. An extra piece of fruit won't matter. It's so hard to believe that every bite counts. It's so hard to know that. And it's also important to give ourselves a break. OA defines abstinence as refraining from compulsive eating and compulsive food behaviors while working toward or maintaining a healthy body weight. If we're doing those things, we're abstinent. For me, I can't make myself too crazy about my food plan. I have one, I use it, but the definition of abstinence is what matters for me. That's heartbreaking. Whoever's going through that, whoever asked that question, all I can tell you is that I'm with you. I'm with you, man. I know that how heartbreaking that is. And if you keep coming back and keep working the steps, my experience is this will pass.
Thank you, Gary. We have a couple of questions around sponsoring. First, are you available? Second, how do you sponsor people? And third, what should you look for? What should I look for in a sponsor?
the third one first. What you should look for is somebody who has what you want, somebody who's recovered from compulsive eating. Your sponsor doesn't have to be your best friend. Sometimes they are. I mean, sometimes we become very friendly, but we don't have to be friends. I've sponsored people I don't like. I love everybody. I love everybody in program. I don't like everybody. If you like everybody you meet in program, you're not going to enough meetings. It's just the odds, like there's 30 people, 39 people in this room. The odds of my liking 39 people is pretty slim. Like, just being the judgmental bastard that I am, it's just not likely. But loving everybody, yeah, that I got, I've become good at. As far as how I sponsor, I give away the program that was given to me as best I can, but I also, you have to sponsor the sponsor you've been given. There's a movement now, and there's a lot of people who talk about sponsoring, going through the steps quickly, they talk about working the steps as if your hair is on fire. That's great if you are a sponsee who knows your hair is on fire. My experience is that most newcomers come in and their hair really is on fire, and they're kind of like, something burning? I'm not sure. I think I smell something burning. They're not ready to work this stuff so fast. So you kind of have to sponsor, the sponsor you're given. So that's how I sponsor. But I do sponsor. I use all the literature. I use both, or not all the literature, but I use the big book a lot, and I also use both 12 and 12s. I'm not a believer. There is a movement. There's a large segment of OA right now that believes only in the big book and big book only. I'm very adverse to that movement. I'm very first, our unity and diversity policy doesn't just say we accept all people regardless of race, gender, identity, all that stuff. It also says we accept all approaches to the 12 steps. It's part of our unity with diversity is approaching, anyhow, I'm preaching now, forgive me. I should just be sharing. That's how I sponsor, and I never know if I'm available. In my head, I'm never available. It depends on who asks. Somebody asked, and what happens is we talk a little bit, and then we get to know each other. We talk a few days, and I pray about it. And if God tells me this is a good match and somebody I should sponsor, I somehow make the time to sponsor them, but even if I'm too busy. And if God tells me it's not a good match and I shouldn't be sponsoring that person, I don't. But I do, even if I say no, I usually try at least to help them find a sponsor. I try to show them where they can find. I try not to leave anybody to die of compulsive eating. That's what happens when we say no. For those of us who, if we don't help them at least find a sponsor, they have a good chance of dying. Anyhow, I'm preaching again. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, we have Gary, with one sentence, help me with something I've been struggling with: forgiveness of those who were abusive to me as a child, forgoing my right to revenge. My question is, was it very difficult to forgive, and how do you do it? Is it verbal to them, or do I say it to myself and pray and meditate on it? Thank you.
I can't answer that in one sentence. First of all, I would never tell another survivor of abuse to forgive. I did, and it empowered me and improved my life. That's a very personal decision. Whether to do that or not to do that is entirely right between you and your God, and I guess your therapist and your sponsor. I did it and continue to do it in my heart and in my spirit and in my prayer life. I never went to them and said, I forgive you. And that would be doing more harm than good. I know if somebody if my daughter ever came to me and said, I forgive you for being whatever, it would break my heart. So I never did that. I forgave and continue to forgive them because, sometimes stuff comes up and you have a memory or, and I have to forgive them again. But I forgive just by opening my heart to them and by seeking compassion. I think compassion really, compassion heals a lot. Compassion heals a lot. That's the best I can tell you.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have any other questions for Gary? I think that's about everything. Unless anybody wants to put something in. Let me just double check here. Oh, hold on. Okay. How about this, Gary? Sorry, my phone is going. Gary, can you tell us what you forgot to tell us? Or you can tell us how you work the 10th step.
I work the 10th step.
Yep, that was a question that just came up.
Well, I didn't forget to tell you this, but I just want to reemphasize, since I have time, I'll reemphasize that this is like, you hear people talking about working the program and you know, it sounds like drudgery, but I gotta tell you, if you're a newcomer, this is such a great way of life. Everyone I know who lives this way of life is happy. I don't know anybody who lives this way of life on a consistent basis and walks around miserable or angry or pissed. So I just gotta say, like, man, what a great, like I said before, we're forced into this. We don't come to it by virtue, but what a blessing that we do. How I work the 10th step. I continue to take, like, I used to think that the 10th step meant, like, at the end of the day, I would just think that I step on anybody's toes today. You know, did I do anything wrong? But 10th step says continue to take personal inventory, and that's what I do. I look at myself in the morning, the evening, I take inventories, I pay attention. I have some character defects now that I did not have in the beginning. When I came in, gossip was not a character defect of mine. It never interested me. I was too self-centered to give a darn about you and your life. You know, gossip wasn't a thing. But I don't know if you know this, but old timers tend to gossip a lot. The old timers, we do. We take other people's inventory. We do. And I get caught up in that sometimes. Like somebody will gossip with me, and instead of saying, you know, leave me alone with that crap, I'll respond, and then afterwards I have to make amends. And after, like gossip has become a character defect. So you know, it says watch for these things. The 10th step in the big book says watch for these feelings. In fact, the acronym my sponsor gave me is WATER. Watch for these feelings. Watch selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Watch for these feelings. Then A, ask God to remove them. That's second, ask God to remove them. We do that right away. Third, talk about it immediately. So it doesn't say talk about it like when you get around to it the next time you see your sponsor. Just talk about it immediately. So when I have one of those things come up, I call somebody, or I write it down. If it's a heavy one, I write it down. I don't write it down if it's minor. But I call somebody or talk to somebody. I'm really fortunate that I have a family member in recovery, and frequently my wife is in recovery. Frequently I'll do 10 steps with her. But I'm also at a 10-step train with a WhatsApp group where you can call somebody and do a 10-step. And when you do a 10-step, you know, you do like a mini 4th step. I'm resentful at, or I'm fearful of, or I'm lying about, and you know what it affects my ambitions and my sexuality. You know, what does it affect? What's my role in it? What's my character defects, and what would God have me be? And then talk about it immediately. Then make amends when necessary. That's E is erase. It's like erase, make amends when necessary. And then the most important part of the 10th step that most of us forget is redirect our thoughts to somebody we can help. That's the last part of the 10th step. It says redirect our thoughts to somebody we can help. And I gotta tell you, the 10th step doesn't always take away my resentment, but redirecting my thoughts to somebody who can help, focusing on somebody else, frequently does. So that's how I work the 10th step. I hope that. And I also do some writing. I have one of those journals. A lot of the regions, region 8, region 7, I think region 2, have journals for sale that if you just in the morning and at night have a 10th step built into it. There's also Overeaters Anonymous has given permission to a app called OA Tools, and that is even though it's an outside enterprise, it's been given our permission to use our logo. That also has a 10th step journal written into it, so you can just do it online if you're more comfortable with that. That's how I do a 10-step. But it doesn't take 5 minutes. Oh, well, it takes more than 5 minutes, but it's not a big deal. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's really not. It's really kind of joyful.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gary. I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Alan. And we'll wrap it up. At this time, we're going
Thank you. Thank you, Kara, and thank you again, Gary. That was incredible. Really, really enjoyed that. Okay, I'm sure everybody else did too. So many people still here. Okay, so thank you for your service, time and energy and just being so honest with us today. So our chat will be open for members to share their telephone numbers for outreach. And if you are an available sponsor, please indicate this as well. For any newcomers, if you are new and have more questions, not just for Gary, but our newcomer greeters, we'll have 2 newcomer greeters in a separate breakout session at the end of the meeting. So if you'd like to stay behind and join that session, please feel free to raise your hand electronically. At the end of the meeting, we'll get you added to that. And we also, this meeting has a WhatsApp group that's linked for fellowship between meetings. That will also be shared into the chat shortly. Feel free to join us there. And we will close this meeting the same way we always close a New Freedom Big Book study, by reading the 12 promises of recovery as laid out in the Big Book, beginning at the bottom of page 83, if we're painstaking, and ending if we work for them. Gary, do you have your Big Book to hand? Are you able to read that for us?
I can share them.
I have it nearby, but I know them. If we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we're going to be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know new freedom and a new happiness. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Of these extravagant promises, we think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. So work, work, work.
Thank you again. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Our meetings do recur on a weekly basis at the same time on the same link each week. So I'm just going to end the recording. Got to do my bit.